In 1991, Japan was the richest nation on Earth, not just rich and comprehensively wealthy. Japanese companies owned Rockefeller Center, Columbia Pictures, and Pebble Beach. The Imperial Palace grounds in Tokyo were theoretically worth more than the entire state of California. Japanese banks were the largest in the world. The Nikkei stock index had risen for 40 straight years. And every economist, every investor, every analyst agreed Japan would soon be the world's largest economy. Then, in January 1991, something invisible happened. Not a crash, not a crisis, not an event you could point to and say, that's when it broke. Just a quiet shift. Growth simply stopped, and an entire generation would pay the price for not noticing. To understand what happened in 1991, you have to understand what 1989 felt like in Japan. This wasn't just optimism, it was collective certainty. For 4 decades, Japan had risen without interruption. From the ashes of World War II to the second largest economy on Earth, from poverty to wealth so extreme, it seemed mythological. The formula was simple, and it had never failed. Work hard, save diligently, invest in manufacturing, export to the world, and watch the numbers rise. Every year, predictably, inevitably, the numbers rose. Japanese cars dominated global markets. Japanese electronics were synonymous with quality. Japanese management techniques were studied in business schools worldwide. Japan as number one wasn't a book title, it was a statement of obvious fact. Real estate prices rose so high they became absurd, but absurdity had become normal. A small apartment in Tokyo cost what a mansion cost in Los Angeles. Land prices in Tokyo were higher than land prices anywhere in human history. But this wasn't a bubble, at least. That's not what it felt like from inside. This was Japan's destiny finally being realized. When you've risen for 40 years without interruption, up stops being a direction and becomes an identity. The wealth felt permanent because it had been continuous for longer than most people could remember. Salarymen in their 50s had never experienced a recession. Young people entering the workforce had only known prosperity. The idea that growth could simply stop, not crash dramatically, but just cease, was psychologically impossible to imagine. And that impossibility is exactly what made the collapse invisible when it began. January 1991, the Nikkei stock index, which had peaked at nearly 39,000 in December 1989, continued falling. But stock corrections had happened before. This felt temporary, except it wasn't. Something fundamental had shifted, but the shift was invisible because it wasn't dramatic. There was no Black Monday crash, no bank failures, no panic in the streets. Just asset prices that stopped rising and started falling slowly, persistently, unremarkably. Real estate values began declining, not collapsing, declining. Corporations that had borrowed billions against rising asset values suddenly found those assets were worth less than the loans. But this happened gradually, spread across thousands of companies, visible only in quarterly reports that most people never read. The government and the Bank of Japan saw the numbers, but they didn't see the shift. They saw a correction that needed managing, not a transformation that had already occurred. They believed they could stabilize prices, restart growth, return to normal, but normal no longer existed. The 40-year formula had stopped working, but the belief in the formula remained. So policymakers did what had always worked before, lowered interest rates, encouraged lending, waited for growth to resume. And they waited, and growth didn't come. Interest rates dropped to 1%, then 0.5%, then effectively zero. Still no growth. Companies stopped investing. Households stopped spending. Banks stopped lending. Not because of panic, but because of something worse: caution. When everyone becomes cautious simultaneously, the economy doesn't crash, it freezes. The 1990s became a decade of denial disguised as patience. Every year, economists predicted recovery would come next year. Just a temporary slowdown, normal cyclical correction, recovery is just around the corner. The corner never came. Corporate executives kept operating as if growth would resume. They didn't lay off workers; lifetime employment was sacred. They didn't restructure that would admit the old model was broken. They didn't innovate aggressively; innovation implies the current approach is insufficient. Instead, they waited, preserved the structures, protected the relationships, maintained the system. The system that had produced the miracle could surely produce another miracle. All it needed was time. Banks faced a unique horror. They had loaned trillions of yen against assets that were now worth half, sometimes a third, of the loan value. Those loans would never be fully repaid. But acknowledging that would mean acknowledging insolvency, so banks didn't acknowledge it. They kept the loans on their books as performing even when they weren't performing. They rolled over debt, extended payment terms. Did anything except admit the money was gone. This created zombie companies, businesses that couldn't grow, couldn't invest, couldn't die. They existed in suspended animation, consuming credit that could have gone to new, dynamic companies. The entire economy became a museum dedicated to preserving what once was, rather than building what could be. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the Japanese public began to realize something permanent had changed. This wasn't a recession that would end. This was the new normal. The generation entering the workforce in the 1990s, the lost generation, faced a reality their parents couldn't comprehend. No lifetime employment, no guaranteed promotions, no steadily rising wages. Many would never own homes. Many would delay or skip marriage and children because the economic foundation their parents took for granted simply didn't exist. The psychological impact was devastating. An entire society had been built on the assumption of perpetual growth. Retirement systems assumed rising asset values. Social structures assumed stable employment. Cultural expectations assumed each generation would be wealthier than the last. When those assumptions died, the systems they supported didn't immediately collapse, they just slowly, quietly failed to work. The government tried everything, infrastructure spending on a scale that would have rebuilt Japan twice over. Interest rates at zero, then negative, quantitative easing before anyone knew what to call it. Nothing worked, or rather, nothing restarted growth. The policies prevented collapse. Japan never had a catastrophic crash. But preventing collapse isn't the same as creating growth. Japan became an economy in equilibrium, a much lower level of dynamism. GDP barely moved for 2 decades, then 3 decades. Wages stagnated for 30 years. The population began to shrink as birth rates fell below replacement. Tokyo, once the symbol of unstoppable growth, became the symbol of a different phenomenon: high prosperity without growth, wealth without dynamism, stability without hope. Here's what makes Japan's collapse so uniquely terrifying. It never looked like a collapse. No breadlines, no mass unemployment, no revolution. Tokyo remained one of the most advanced, safe, wealthy cities on Earth. The trains ran on time. Technology advanced. Society functioned. If you visited Japan in 2020, it looked successful by almost any measure. But beneath the surface, something had died in 1991 and never come back: the belief that tomorrow would be better than today. That's not measured in GDP statistics. It's measured in the decisions millions of people make. Do you take risks or play it safe? Do you invest in the future or protect the present? Do you believe in growth or accept stagnation? An entire society chose the second option in each case, not because they wanted to, but because the first option had betrayed them. The Japanese government still runs deficits trying to stimulate growth. The Bank of Japan still maintains zero interest rates. The policies that should have worked decades ago remain in place, producing diminishing returns. Japan's debt to GDP ratio is over 250%, the highest in the developed world. But because the debt is held domestically and in yen, there's no currency crisis, no default, no dramatic reckoning. Just perpetual deficit spending to maintain an economy that stopped growing in 1991. This is the paradox of modern Japan. It is simultaneously one of the most successful societies in human history and a cautionary tale about what happens when growth simply stops. Both things are true, and that's what makes the lesson so difficult to absorb. Japan didn't collapse in 1991, it stopped. Growth stopped, dynamism stopped, the belief that things would keep getting better stopped. And once that psychological shift occurred, all the economic policy in the world couldn't restart it. You can't stimulate confidence with interest rates. You can't create optimism with infrastructure spending. You can't legislate belief in the future. Silent collapses don't announce themselves. They happen in the space between what was and what comes next, a space Japan has occupied for over 30 years. This was Japan. And this is what it looks like when the richest nation on Earth simply stops growing, stops believing, and stops imagining that tomorrow will be different from today.